Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Detecting and Defending Against Candidate Misrepresentation. I'm Josh Jones, and I'm excited to welcome you to this important discussion. Over the next hour, we're going to explore how talent acquisition and recruiting teams can spot candidate misrepresentation early, respond more effectively, and protect hiring integrity without creating friction in the process. We're joined today by Kellison Rose, who will be moderating, along with Jen Jones, Hannah Rodriguez, and Frank Halvin. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our good friends at CoderPad for making this session possible. And just a quick couple of housekeeping notes, please use the chat feature to connect with other attendees. If you have questions, please try to use the Q&A tab so that we can find them quickly. This webinar is being recorded, and we will release the recording shortly after the webinar ends. Kellison, thank you so much for moderating today. I'm going to hand this over to you. If you need anything at all, just holler.
Thanks, Josh. We're all here because we're experiencing or understand the threat of fraudulent candidates in our pipeline or worse, on our payroll. I'm Kellison Rose. I lead talent programs and operations at Cedar. I've been in this space for 8 years. I'll introduce the recruiting experts on our panel. Frank, let's start with you. Can you give us a quick intro to yourself?
Sure. So I lead the product team at CoderPad. We're a technical recruiting hiring platform. And I spend a lot of my time working with customers to implement AI into their workflows, not just as tools to help with the process, and that's certainly a part, but also to measure AI proficiency across all roles.
Thank you, Frank. Jen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Jen Jones, Senior Technical Talent Advisor at Cedar. I lead complex Staff Plus and leadership roles across engineering and product. But what really drives me is the operational side, and it's building processes, systems, and AI-enabled workflows that help our teams hire better, faster, and safer.
And Hannah.
Yeah, thanks, Kellison. I'm excited to be part of this conversation. Feels like I've been in TA or consulting for decades now, but today I'm leading talent acquisition for the Zip team in the US. And we're focused on partnering with the executive team to build a hiring function that scales with speed, has discipline, and creates decisions that leaders can lean into with trust.
Great. Thank you all. Excited to hear from you over the next hour. The many manifestations of candidate fraud require similar diligence, but different techniques to identify. So we'll get into that practical guidance. Hannah, let's stay with you for a moment. What types of candidate misrepresentation are you seeing most often right now? There are risks of inflated experience, AI-generated resumes, interview stand-ins, deepfake video, more?
Yeah. What we're seeing is primarily the AI amplified exaggeration, resumes that have been polished beyond what the person can actually defend in conversation. And, these candidates who would sound really great, they look really great on paper until you go one layer deeper and the depth isn't there. And that often shows up as, like you said, resumes that are highly polished but don't hold up under depth. Candidates who speak in themes but struggle to anchor on real decisions, trade-offs, or outcomes in real time. That's the bulk of what we've seen in the market the last 12 months.
Jen, what about you?
Yeah, echo Hannah. I don't know how many times I've looked at a resume and just gotten so excited because they look so perfect. And if they're too perfect, they might be. Definitely on top of that, you see this alphabet soup in terms of skills, and it's just such a wide range of skills that it's not even possible for them to have. So that's one thing we're seeing. And then last, you might wake up on a recruiter video screen with somebody that is misrepresenting. They've got a headset on, they've got proxies in their ears, so all in there.
What about you, Frank? What are you experiencing?
Yeah, I think, certainly echo all that. We all are seeing perfect resumes flooding the system. I think a little bit of a funny / ironic anecdote. So one of our customers, close partners, is LinkedIn. And the LinkedIn team came to me and said, hey, you know what? We're having a lot of trouble with these perfect profiles that match the job description in every way. Where, again, I'm working with their recruiting team, but I said, hey, isn't this a little bit of the byproduct of your product team doing the easy apply button and then flooding the system? But so, if LinkedIn is seeing this, then everyone's seeing it. And really that from our point of view, that's why it's really important throughout the process, starting with that top of funnel, to ask candidates to demonstrate what they can do, and that way you're able to, suss out who really is behind this magnificent profile.
Yeah, everyone is susceptible. Where do you see in the funnel that fraud most commonly slips through? Is it more closer to the top at application review, mid-funnel technical assessment? You catch it at offer? Hannah, what have you seen?
The noise is early on, at least from what we're seeing today, and I think that's pretty relevant across the board. But application review and recruiter screens are, from my perspective, highest risk stages today, just due to volume alone, especially if verification is light. And the problem that I've seen with most organizations and recruiters that I've talked to is that we're putting most of our rigor at the back of the funnel. Final rounds, panel interviews, offstage references, and that's essentially leaving that front door wide open. So that's where my focus has been, at least, is investing in that architecture of the front door. And if we do that, everything downstream, hopefully, will get easier. But that's where you can catch the bulk of it.
And Jen, is that similar to what you're experiencing?
Yeah, at Cedar, we see it in application and recruiter video screen stages. Thankfully, nobody has gotten past us, although we are serving as a human firewall there. But we are, of course, doing pulse checks, audits, and things like that. So, yeah.
And Frank, I'll ask you to confirm, as well as maybe respond to Dawn's question here, some of the ways that you're fighting the battle at the top of the funnel due to the volume and the rate at which we see fraud.
Yeah, so agree. The biggest issue is at the top of the funnel, and there's no panacea. There's no one, click this and it's the easy button. And it comes down to running a good, standardized, healthy process. I mean, I think that's a little bit of what Hannah and Jen are talking about. And it's, as long as you have the proper gates, the proper, checks starting from the very first call, that's how you root out fraud, and you're gonna have to do it all throughout your process. This has always been true, and it's gonna, honestly, it's those same basics that are gonna carry us into the future as well.
Thank you. Jen or Hannah, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
Oh, that one.
I think Frank is, Frank just said the same thing. It's kind of the same structure we've always lived by. If you're recruiting with rigor and structure, it's just amplifying it, and more rigor, more vigilance, documentation that's required.
Thank you. This next question for what's the business impact that we're seeing from candidate misrepresentation, and what are we underestimating about that? Because some of the costs are wasted time, bad hires. There's a security risk of getting those bad hires in. Jen, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's potential for all of the above. I mean, but where I land is on wasted time and also recruiter frustration. I mean, that's where it hits us at Cedar. I did a pulse check. And so for engineering, we had 18,000 applications over the course of a 60-day time period. And because candidate misrepresentation is so prevalent for us, especially with data and software engineering roles, it's causing us to take longer to vet applications. And it does increase, time to fill in the end. What would normally take us, a quick scan because we know the profile so well could take us 3-4 minutes, per application to triangulate things like that. And, you can do the math, it's a lot of time wasted.
Frank, do you have experience to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Wasted time is a factor. It's kind of like picking your poison of like which of these is the biggest business impact. They all impact the business negatively, and so I tend to focus on what happens, after you might hire somebody, and so the cost of a bad hire. I think often think about that certainly as I engage with our customers, and just once you have somebody in the door, there's just such this negative drag on the team, and then you're having to manage this person out. And so I think whether that person might just simply be not necessarily malicious, but just not as qualified as they may have represented themselves throughout the interview process. I mean, I think already that is a drag on the team. Of course, there's folks who might be even negatively proactively negatively impacting the team.
Mm.
And so ultimately, there is this balance. It's like you want to properly vet everyone, but you also don't want to have a interview process that has 1,000 stages and makes it impossible to hire somebody. And so it's just finding that right balance. And again, I think that's just why we have these tough jobs and why we have to engage with these tools in this structured system.
Speaking of making it maybe not impossible, but difficult for the good players and the talent that we want to attract, Hannah, I wonder if you can speak to Madeline's question. Another unexpected, underestimated cost of fraud is how that might change the expectation for the hiring bar. If we're seeing an influx of perfect looking resumes, does that start to subconsciously bias hiring managers towards wanting more and expecting more when it might not even be realistic? I wonder, Hannah, if you've experienced that in your stints with hiring managers.
I'm sure to a certain level, but the majority of what we're hearing, because we are being pretty loud about this and making sure that we're ahead of our hiring managers in our systems, is making sure they understand that there is an increase in fraudulent resumes. And it might, again, not be a deep fake or a proxy or something that's super scary. It's more around like everyone has AI, and it's the cycle of AI. We're using AI to filter in some capacity or another. They're using AI to build this beautiful resume. And so we do our best to start with our edge cases when we're presenting, does this look right before we go to market? But we're trying to be as thorough as we can to validate some of those core competencies before passing them on to the hiring managers. So probably a little, but I don't think it's a bottleneck for us today, at least.
Thank you for speaking to that. Now let's get to verification. How do you balance speed to hire with stronger verification without making the process feel hostile toward real candidates? Hannah, could you speak to that?
Yeah, I haven't come across any hostile candidates yet, thankfully. But I feel like that's likely coming from how verification is introduced versus the verification itself. You'll have your outliers, of course, but when a process feels clear to me, that's kindness. That is what creates a great candidate experience. So avoiding ambiguous or inconsistent processes, avoid throwing in multiple random interviews at the end to double check on things. So to me, really, I think the idea around creating a strong process is clarity up front and structure. And if you do have to go back and double down on certain areas, it's just communicating that with the candidate as early as possible and making sure that we're documenting appropriately to avoid repeat steps.
Jen, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I do see technology as a good answer. They're not all created equal. I mean, I've evaluated a number of tools over the last 6 months, and some are a little more intense to candidates than others. Without naming names, I'm excited that we're going to be piloting a new candidate misrepresentation tool, and specifically around applications. In short, I think it will help to analyze patterns and inconsistencies, across candidate data that humans couldn't possibly reliably catch up on scale or at scale. And again, human makes the decision. Can't say that enough. So.
I wonder, Jen, if you could also speak a little bit to Olivia's question, because I know we've talked about this. If there are techniques you incorporate in your screenings or in your interviews to see if the candidate is using AI or is actively practicing fraud.
Oh God, yes. So last year, I was leading a staff level search, and I got a string of fake candidates. I mean, I'm just going to say it. The first one, I didn't know. They looked perfect. They looked amazing. And I got on the video screen with them, which if you're not doing video screens, do video screens because you can actually see them. But in short, blurry background, sounded like a call center. There were voices in the background. Their mouth didn't match up to them talking. They looked like they actually had a headset on. So they had a proxy, which is somebody in their ear that's actually guiding them on what to say in real time. And I'm seeing all this real time for the first time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And then it gets into the stories, not to get too deep, but what Hannah said earlier is totally right. They talk in themes. They don't tell stories because they don't have that experience. And so And it's something you can catch, if you are a recruiter that kind of knows your stuff. So yeah, that's one thing I'm seeing. I could go deeper, but I'll pause.
Okay. Frank, how about your thoughts about verification for potentially fraudulent candidates without raising hostility?
Yeah, I mean, there's this balance. I think there's of course, there's the basics around the ID verification stuff and so on. And really, this is where throughout the process, Jen kind of alludes to getting in a little bit deeper and digging in with a candidate, and with that, I think throughout your process, the best I could advise is having somebody finding ways to have them demonstrate their skills. And it doesn't need to be this, adversarial process. I think what we often talk about with our customer base is how do you bring a really interesting problem that you're working on, and guess what? Those best candidates, if you're collaborating with them together throughout the interview process on this interesting problem, it makes it fun for them in many ways. They get a glimpse of what it's like to work with you and your team, and these are the problems, and that should actually excite them. And so finding ways to bring that, throughout the interview, of course, I would say like with a tool, an assessment tool or whatnot, but ultimately bringing something like that into the interview process both allows you to surface that signal and really get to who they are, as well as, provide a good candidate experience.
I love that. It's an opportunity for intellectual honesty early in your relationship forming with the candidate.
Yeah, and I think so far, like a little bit of this is also adversarial. Like, how do we keep AI out of the process? How do we keep AI out of the interview? And honestly, and certainly our customer base is slanted towards the tech-oriented folks. But as I talk with our customer base, so OpenAI, Meta, some of that group, or even like the big banks, the Goldmans and so on of the world, AI is coming, and as much as we can't keep it out there, and so it's a little bit of like, how do you smartly integrate into the process, have candidates use it? But the interesting question is often, how are you using AI? Because I think we're all using it in our day-to-day jobs, and we're quickly shifting to now actually wanting these skills. And so how do you actually surface that in the process?
Right, exactly. And that's the definition, the guardrail between how you're using it in a sanctioned way that demonstrates the modernity of your organization, but without inviting fraud.
Yep.
Brilliant. Thanks, Frank. Let's talk about detection. Jen, can you share with me what you've seen as some of the earliest warning signs you catch in resumes, portfolios, outreach responses that indicate there might be misrepresentation?
Yeah. And so I want to be careful here because I'm going to cite some things, but it's not mutually exclusive. Don't think if one shows up that, oh my gosh, they're not a real candidate. So you have to look for like multiple indicators that kind of point to it. So we've already mentioned, like, if a resume looks too perfect, it might be. So you kind of need to go a level deeper, like, take a look at their, LinkedIn profile. When was it created? Do they have any connections? Do they have any post history? Those are just a few things. But from a resume standpoint, I did some pretty heavy analysis on ones that I identified as suspected misrepresentation. And it was odd. It was crazy. They all had similarities. They all had big tech company names, that you're like, oh my gosh, those are great companies. They even had formatting, that was very similar, and like silly things like the color name of the company was like in blue or green font. It was just odd. Like every one of them had it. They all had big numbers in their resume, like improved performance or reduced latency by 40% and scaled to millions, but there was no indication of how that happened. It was just kind of, a quick note. And once I actually talked to people, there were common themes that were repeated as well. They all said to present, and when I talked to them, they all said they'd left their jobs, and it was all because of return to work. It was all just really eerie and strange. But in PS, you can use AI to look for themes, on resumes and look for kind of consistencies there. So,
thank you. Hannah, Frank, do you have anything you'd like to add? Okay. Hannah, what screening questions or verification prompts have you found effective for quickly validating whether someone truly did the work they claim they did?
There's so many. Obviously, like going into it and truly understanding, I think what the job is and what good looks like is like the key here. So recruiters getting in a little bit earlier to that conversation with kickoff, because that will help you determine what is super polished versus what is true experience. So that early constant calibration, plus checks with your hiring team to make sure that that bar is still consistent. What you're hearing is actually showing up in their interviews. It's hard because we're recruiting for roles that we're not the experts on all day, every day. But if you're aligned on that strong answer and what it sounds like, then you're evaluating against the same standard. And so similar to what Jen said here, it's really the depth technique. So it's like sequencing, it's asking a candidate to walk you through, special projects. It does become a bit more conversational. Normalize and probe is what I really teach folks to lean into. So making sure you're understanding their language and explain to them what you're trying to even understand their impact was within whatever they're speaking to. If they can speak about trade-offs, how they weighed them, what worked, what didn't, what did they own versus the team, those pieces there, and then breaking that script to almost pause when it does start to feel polished, because polished isn't a red flag, similar again to what Jen said. It's one data point. So pause there, get a bit deeper, and we still want to keep structure to avoid bias creeping in, right, from one interviewer to the next. But it's being able to understand how you dig deeper until you hopefully, get the type of responses you're looking for.
And Frank, could you tell us about the details you get into when making that evaluation?
Yeah, I think both Jen and Hannah are talking about this. Like, how do you just really roll up your sleeves, just dive in with the candidate? And I guess the Post-it note that I have here on my screen as I'm, was earlier doing an interview is, ask why. Just keep asking why, and that'll like really dig in. And honestly, I think that applies to all interviews from, earlier I was hiring a product manager, so to a data analyst, to somebody that you might be hiring as you're building out your talent team, to technical interviews. Certainly, I at CoderPad have a lot of insight into technical interviews, but even within those, I think oftentimes over the past, call it 15 years, the typical MO would be, well, you ask somebody, I'm an engineer on the call, and I'm going to ask somebody a question where there is one right answer, and then I kick up my feet and I let the candidate kind of work on it for 30 minutes, and then did they come out with 17 or whatever the answer is? Mm-hmm. And so I think these are in many ways the wrong questions. Guess what? AI is going to answer that and tell you 17, but is that actually the useful point? And even in many ways, like, you're asking the wrong question. The real world is messier than that. There is no one right answer. And if you're asking questions where there is a right answer, then you're probably asking the wrong interview question in many ways. So whether you're using a platform like, again, a CoderPad or something else, just finding a way to ask those more open-ended questions, asking questions in oftentimes what we call a progressive way, where you think of a case where you're always revealing something else. And now how do you scale this up? Okay, now how do you serve a different user or whatever? Now how do you go to mobile if it's a technical sense, or in many other, there's many other types of cases out there. And then asking them why, even as you bring in AI in an interview, why did you accept or reject that suggestion? Why did you prompt that? I think you can apply that same why, the magical 3 letters, in many different ways, and that'll really allow you to dig in.
Thank you, Frank. Jen, bringing it back around, do you have other technical tips that you apply when doing the pre-screen?
Definitely. And I mean, I learned a lot through actually just talking to candidates that were misrepresenting. I took 4 video meetings just because I wanted to continue learning. So, I mean, yeah, if you're going to ask surface level questions like, are you full stack? Are you back end leaning or front end leaning? Do you know Python? They might pass, they might pass your screen. So it is about asking questions that can stump them. So one that I asked that really did kind of trip them up, tell me a story about a time when you had multiple stakeholders asking for different things and you couldn't satisfy them all. It was literally like blank stare, pause, nothing, and the call soon ended. So, questions like that. I think also, and Hannah talked about this too, ask them for a concrete project. Often they talk in very high level themes. And so they throw out nice little buzzwords. And it's like, wait a minute, no, you need to anchor it in an actual story. It needs to have a clear start and end. When did it happen within their tenure, of their, within their company? What was their personal ownership? Like, what did they own specifically? What was their clear responsibility? What was a meaningful technical decision that they made, in that project? And like, did they get pushback? All of these things, like they literally just stare blankly. And then again, the call is very soon.
I've even heard something as simple as, which neighborhood in Dallas do you live in? Like some of the surface level claims made on a resume.
No, this is true. I think we had that. Like, I've lived in Austin. It's like, oh my gosh, you lived in Austin. Have you eaten at Simply Thai? And it was like, although be careful. Like, I mean, clearly we want to stick to the, core, what are the, vetting them for the actual job. So.
Yeah, but there's a corpus of
yes.
data points that you collect.
Go ahead, Frank. I really like, you're asking about the stakeholders. Who were the stakeholders? Why were they, maybe at odds? And how did you help resolve that? I mean, this is like the messiness of our actual jobs and what we're requiring, this human thought behind. It's not, if we're not going to automate our jobs away tomorrow. And so like, I think really digging into those details will really reveal, like, that's the interesting part. That's like the, how would they make that decision?
That's the art form of what you do. Alicia, I hope that answers your very thoughtful question, which I think was in response to Frank saying, get into those magical 3 letters, why? So Alicia was asking, are there certain question types that combat generated AI answers better? So I hope that between Frank and Jen, they answered that question. And then I'll come back around as we're talking about screening questions. Michael asked a question. If any of you have worked with your legal teams to help revise screening questions in this era of combating fraud, or if you find that it's the tried and true methods with just a little bit more rigor and oversight.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. I've not worked with legal teams on this because we haven't found it to be, fully necessary. I just partner very closely. We all do, here at Cedar with our hiring leaders, because clearly they're partners. And so they're going to give us, questions and then kind of peel the onion back, asking layers and kind of what's the next and next. So it's been effective with us with hiring managers.
Okay, great. And we've talked about don't anchor too strongly on any one thing. Hannah, can you tell us a little bit about how you differentiate a nervous candidate against a deceptive one, and especially in a virtual environment?
Yeah, this is something that's coming up quite often, especially we do a full interview training certification program within our organization. So it's like constantly, bringing people into this conversation. And this is where that gray line of bias starts to creep in. Biggest piece of advice is just training on stacking signals, not jumping to conclusions. Like one awkward answer, one data point is not a go-to decision type of prompt. It's more like continue to probe and ask deeper. But the pattern might be there. So when you're thinking of like a nervous candidate, they usually can still go pretty deep if you give them the right conditions. Again, deceptive candidates often cannot. They can't break that variation or get much deeper. That will likely evolve, and we're going to have to get smarter with the way that we do that. But today, it's really just trying to get to the depth, the deeper responses and questions, and also normalizing, right? And it's just taking that moment to make sure that we're not doing the mental gymnastics to fill in the blanks and, oh, this person paused, or they're looking to the left or right, they can't keep eye contact. I have mad ADHD. I cannot keep eye contact if you pay me. You'll think I'm cheating on everything. I'm always sitting here like this talking to you. It's where the creativity comes from. So you can't take that away from folks. It's just, you have to, stack your signals and give people the benefit of the doubt. Social engineering is built to work against us, but if you go in with good intent, you assume good intent, honey attracts, it attracts more bees is the way I look at it.
Frank, what have you been experiencing as some common false positives? How do you reduce the chance of unfairly flagging a legitimate candidate?
Yeah, I mean, the one that I hear about the most is actually the one that Hannah just mentioned. It's like the candidate who happens to like look over here or whatever. And I mean, I knew this was coming a little bit as we talked about the agenda. And so I've actually been looking at, you three, and you three are looking all over the place. And I think do we have somebody feeding us exactly how to handle this conversation? I can assure you we are not. But again, it's what Hannah talked about. You can't over-index on any single signal. There are many reasons why somebody, as I just looks off to the side, or even why somebody picks up their phone and glances at it. And the way that we often talk about it, whether it's training interviewers here at my organization or even with our customers, treat it as you would in person. I think we talk about we're on a camera and there's a little box around us, and so you need to treat it differently. If I was sitting at a table across from a candidate and that candidate picked up their phone and glanced at it and put it back down, I would probably ask them is something wrong? And you would probably engage in some sort of follow-up conversation. And so you can do that as well, when somebody is remote. Just because they're remote doesn't mean you can't ask those same questions and dive in. Maybe I'm worried about my kid at school, who's sick today, or maybe I'm trying to cheat. I don't know, any one of these can be possible. And so how do you not just automatically have this it's like a bingo card to sometimes think of if this and check and then therefore throw out the candidate. It's never as simple as that.
I think that's a fair point. We don't want to be liable for passing someone in this world where we're so afraid of fraud, but normalizing on what those human behaviors are and building rapport around them is so important. I'm curious, Hannah, you mentioned a certification process, and if you could talk to us a little bit more about what recruiter training should include so that they can confidently escalate concerns without overreacting or creating bias.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fun part about our certification program is it's for the entire hiring panels. Anyone that touches hiring, we're hoping by next year is required to be certified. But from our TA team, yes, they're also required to go through that same training. And the core skill, honestly, that I lean into the most here is around one, how to develop that initial strong understanding of what good looks like and sounds like per role, using that critical thinking to understand how to normalize and probe, how to use AI in smart ways when it's if you don't understand this tool, what are some other ways that you can validate it? Those are exciting ways to use a GPT. And the other is how you document what you observed versus what you interpreted. So I think that's a key pillar for us. It's how are you identifying and naming the specific signals that you're seeing rather than describing a gut feeling? And then lastly, it's the escalation process. So I see a lot of people right now that don't have an escalation process. They don't know the decisioning criteria. And so they will either get too loud too quickly. They'll panic and over-index their investigation on a candidate, which ends up not being fair, and can lead to multiple issues. It's creating, this is what you do with in this scenario, this is what comes next, this is who to involve, and then create those strong SLAs and cross-functional agreements on what comes next and what to do. I do think that's going to continue to evolve. You're going to have to be agile, and so is your team as you experience new types of fraud. But that's at the core of what I see working.
Thank you. Frank, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree with Hannah's points about the training. And certainly, I think part of that is also having, concrete policies. And so that's both for internal and then even external candidates. I think earlier I mentioned potentially bringing AI, encouraging all of us to try and bring AI into the process, because that is a part of what candidates do. And it creates a little bit of this weird mindset of, wait, you're asking me to use AI on the job, yet, you're asking it to keep out of the interview. That it's this weird disconnect. That being said, whatever your policy is, having that clarity to candidates and to interviewers, is AI use allowed? To what degree? Is it prohibited? Is it certain parts of the interview? Whatever that is. And I think that clarity helps frame exactly what candidates can and should do, and then therefore also what the interview can kind of watch out and call out within that interview. Ultimately, all this training and this policy and so on also should get paired with the proper tooling. And so a quick example is just using tools that help any of you take notes. So like Good or Bad, we have a feature that offers that natively within our environment. And so whether you use our product or somebody else's product, I think ultimately a tool like that allows the interviewer to pay attention to the candidate, to run a proper process, to like think of and go in depth versus, maybe be too busy taking notes or something like that. And so like these are easy, just little ways you can add tools to your process to, again, have this high-powered experience and serve as that right signal.
Jen, what's your experience using tools to escalate concerns?
Yeah, so we use MetaView at Cedar, and of course, all of our calls are recorded. And I've definitely taken a call, and number one, I couldn't hear them well, and things weren't matching up, but it sounded to me like they were talking in very high-level themes when I asked a multi-step complex question. I went back to my transcript and looked at it, and sure enough, it was nonsense. So definitely, if you have those tools, use them.
I'm going to stick with you, Jen. How do you train interviewers to detect coaching, third-party help, or scripted answers during live interviews?
Yeah, so here at Cedar, we did create kind of a guidance document, for hiring managers on things that we've actually detected, like through our actual experience. And so if things pop up, they can just be aware. And I mentioned this a bit earlier, but for example, video, if there's kind of a blurred background, there's background switching. Sometimes it's one background and all of a sudden it pops to another. Again, this is not just one thing and, it's good. It's kind of a number of things. But like a lag, in repeated frames that doesn't look live, the eye tracking is very strange. And so just, working to call out, some of those things, background noises, sounds like a call center, things like that.
I just wonder, Hannah, if there's anything you want to add?
No, I second Jen. I think we're going to continue to find different areas where we can lean in, and it will be super helpful, but we're still learning, I feel, in real time. But yeah, no, I just echo what Jen was speaking to, and Frank.
Perfect. Okay. Hannah, can you tell us what escalation paths have worked best for you in practice for who gets involved, what evidence is needed, how you prevent inconsistency across teams?
Yes, and I'll touch on it lightly. I think it's really starting before the problem it shows up, hopefully, and if not, as you can, as that does show up. But it's really about bringing in the right stakeholders. So your security team, IT team, people ops, legal, compliance, like build that collectively. It can't be siloed in TA. TA will be running a different assessment and will have different levels of acceptable, misalignment versus people ops and security if you don't correlate that process. And so those partners definitely need to provide the context needed, the legal guardrails and the compliance guardrails to make sure we're protecting the business as much as we're protecting the candidates. Again, there's a lot of bias that can creep in here. So I think it's really getting those folks together, putting in a structure that can and will be consistent and repeatable. Obviously, clear documentation and auditability, and then as things evolve and change, your team again just has to be very agile and evolve with them.
All right, listeners, please take Hannah's advice and reach out to those partners and get your policy started before there's a problem. And Hannah, could you share how you create a culture where interviewers feel safe raising concerns without fear of ruining a candidate experience?
Yeah, this is definitely, subjective to the culture of every company, but I think it's really about reframing like what it means to raise a concern in general. If it's perceived as jeopardizing a candidate's chances, I feel like interviewers and recruiters will stay quiet most of the time. And so I think that positioning this entire process or this entire potential challenge as a responsible hiring mindset is really key there. So it's about protecting the team, the business, and the candidate, and the candidates who are representing themselves accurately. Flagging concerns becomes the right thing to do versus the difficult thing to do, or the the pot stirrer. And so I think it's just creating like consistent language to reinforce it, that we're not building a business case against the candidate. We're trying to ensure that we have enough information to make a fair decision.
Well stated. Frank, I wonder if you can tell us about some of the most reliable methods you've used to verify authenticity in technical interviews, which could include live coding, problem variation, follow-up drills, programming, what that's looked like for you.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, ultimately we use our own product, and I think hopefully that makes sense why, but it's a combination of a lot of the things we've been discussing so far, just from the very beginning. It's how do you set the proper candidate expectations and training interviews to dive deeper, to ask why, to not just sit back and wait for the right answer to what is probably the incorrect question or the wrong problem to present. And so ultimately, so at CoderPad, just as an example, we offer both async assessments and live pairing interviews. I think they go hand in hand and have a different, address different parts of the candidate process. Async tends to be earlier on in the process, live pairing later on in the process. Think of it as just an old school on-site. And so the on-site panel is now in a virtual form, but you would just do those same things and roughly looks the same way. And our leading customers employ both of them with a particular emphasis on pairing and collaboration. I think ultimately these require a couple different ingredients within this technical interview beyond, again, the training the interviewer and the candidate expectation. You have to have the right environment. So an environment you can pair, you can build an application together, you can debug together, an environment that'll let you go outside and ask that realistic thing. Let's go build something that mimics what you do day to day. And let's go build something, again, with AI. And how are you using those tools? Because that is the workflow of today. And so that's what the interview of today should reflect. This also requires, I guess, just the tooling, but then also we talked about the relevant problems to solve. Yeah. And so these aren't math problems. I think the analogy I'd often use is if I'm hiring an accountant, I don't give them a math test. I have them open up Excel and balance my books. And then I would probably ask them not just, did you come out with, 2076 that I owe, but what are the different tax strategies that I employ? And what would you advise? That's where you're getting in deeper. And so that's how we should be approaching all of these interviews, whether it's a technical interview or otherwise. And ultimately, a lot of what this looks like over the course of a 45-minute interview is, again, this case style progressive question that allows for depth and variation, but still keeps it a structured environment. I think it allows infinite depth and infinite variation, in which case there's no structure and no calibration. And I think we all agree that there is the Goldilocks happy middle, and that you're empowered with the proper tooling, the proper training, and all those ingredients together.
I love that. And so you've just given this beautiful example about the accountant not just performing math, but being maybe more of a financial advisor. Can you speak more about non-technical roles, what authenticity checks actually work?
Yeah, and so I think in many of the same ways, you can use the same tools. I think here we use our quote unquote technical interview product for all of our hires, whether that's sales or marketing or customer success. And so again, we try and look towards where will the role be in the future, and a customer success manager, I'll say at CoderPad, needs to be able to use AI to handle a lot of accounts simultaneously. And so a quick example, not to reel too much of the, what our CS team is hiring for or what that interview looks like, but I guess, ultimately we have nothing to hide. There is no, again, one right answer. We ask candidates to come in and use AI to take a look at their book of business. We, of course, have this all transparent in our environment, so we're monitoring and tracking everything and have this artifact that we can look at afterwards. But yeah, use AI to how would you prioritize among these 10 different customers that you're trying to set up calls for next week? How do you prepare for that call? How do you analyze your book? These are the same skills that they're gonna have to employ on the job, and using all the tools at hand, to include AI in our product, and putting all that together gives you a pretty in-depth understanding of how they'll perform their job once they've been hired. And again, I think as much as you can have the interview process reflect what the job is and what the job will be, then that will be a great signal. But then again, what we hear from candidates is like, that's the type of thing that they're excited to go do. And they get true insight into what it will be like to work in your organization.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Frank. You've all spoken a bit about some of the different ways that fraud presents, and we talked about proxy interviewing, where often somebody has a headset on, but that might not even always be the case. I wonder, Hannah, if you could tell us what interview structure changes make it harder for someone else to feed answers in real time during remote interviews.
I feel like it's almost the same as what we've been talking about this whole time, right? It comes down to the structure. It comes down to removing as many of the moving parts as you can from the recruiter's attention and your hiring teams. Like, let them focus on connecting with the candidate instead of this laundry list of checklists. So the more you can remove, the better. But strong interviewers require real engagement versus recall. So it's requiring full presence from the hiring team. Cameras on if it's remote. I think it's, there's the live coding assessments and the screen sharing in certain aspects, but it's not always something you can do. So it's, again, just that virtual piece there. But it comes down to branching questions, multi-step or giving them the opportunity to have multi-step answers, and breaking predictability or shifting direction in those questions or those themes is obviously very helpful. It's harder to do if you're scripted. And then I think the prioritizing like live problem solving, or what would you do if, or okay, now what if your budget was half of that, whether it's technical or not, it's asking those real questions, and you're not looking for the right answer. You're just, doing a quick gut check to make sure that this person does have depth and they can think on their feet, or they're able to explain how they think or work with a lack of data or ambiguity. And those are also culture tells, like if they'll be able to thrive in your environment. But yeah, I think it's just what we've been stating over and over is the focus, and then like the tiered questions.
I love that. Frank, what do you think?
Yeah, I think again, that structure of having something realistic that you dive in deeper, but Hannah, you hit it on the head, and that what you said really resonated in terms of just engaging with the candidate. And if you're asking a simple question with a simple answer and then moving on to the next thing, I mean, you're not connecting with that candidate in any real way. And how do we, jointly with our teams, but then also because we are, in many ways, the tip of the spear, train our organization. Like, what does a good interview look like? It is engaging. You're having a deeper conversation and really digging into a candidate. And that's really where that proper training and understanding of what is that we want out of this interview, and what is a good interview? What does that look like? I think really comes into play.
Jen, is there anything you'd like to add?
I'll just add a small comment. What Hannah said, I really liked. If your interview is focused on getting to a correct answer, that's easier to feed or script. If it's focused more on how a person thinks or how they make decisions, it becomes harder to fake because they have to have real experience in order to speak to it.
Thank you for that final thought. Now, we've got a couple questions in the Q&A on tools, and so we'll pivot our conversation to also talk about tools. Where can tools help the most in identifying verification, proctoring, assessment integrity, plagiarism detection was a question that Nisha was asking, interview monitoring, and what should remain human-led? Hannah, can you kick us off?
Yeah, we don't use a ton of tools today, so it's going to be pretty old school from my perspective, which is not against using tooling by any means. But I think tools should be used where scale is needed, or where you can scale, or pattern detection matters most around like fraud and spam blockers, or the identity validation piece. Even anomaly flagging or plagiarism detection, those areas where human validation might not necessarily be able to get to. But the tools surface signals quickly and consistently in ways that people can't. Human judgment, obviously, it just has to be it has to be the decision makers here. So obviously the final judgment should remain human-led, not just for legal reasons, but also, again, your AI and your tooling cannot engage with a candidate meaningfully. It's not going to understand the motivators for a candidate. It's not going to understand if the candidate is going to thrive in this role, and vice versa. So my rule is really the filter is to just ask, like, does the tool make the human better, or does it try to replace judgment? And the former adds value in that sense. The latter introduces risk. So I recommend using technology to drive efficiency and surface signals, and then the human is where it matters most. It's building the relationships, it's digging through the noise, it's evaluation, context, and decision making.
I think a lot of people would appreciate that these are stopgaps that you can implement without needing to be resourced for tools or needing to onboard something or dedicate resources to something. So I appreciate you saying that the old school still has a place. Frank, do you have more that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that ultimately tools, or at least the right tool, hopefully in this era of a push for profitability and so on, it's one tool that can do many things, not just 50 tools. But it is this combination of tooling plus human decision making. Like, I think that's why we all exist. It's not a existential thing why we exist, but like that is a lot of the role that we play. And honestly, it's also keeping in mind that there is a legal requirement in many jurisdictions, California, New York, the EU, among others, of not just using the bots to kick out humans and stuff like that. It's the human nut needs to be involved in the process to enable that to have that human judgment to make a decision on a candidate. But it also makes it a better candidate interaction. I think we all, as much as like I'll be the first to say I use AI daily and I thoroughly enjoy it. I think we all also enjoy a world where we deal with other humans, and here we are collecting on a human-led webinar and so on, not just listening to a bunch of bots. And so I think ultimately bringing that into the process and making it this welcoming process. I think a lot of what we've been talking about is, it has a very negative connotation. How do you keep the negatives out? How do we keep the bad people out? But ultimately, it's, I think, also reframing it. How do you find the right person? How do you find the best candidate? And so almost thinking about it and trying to reframe it things in that same way.
I really appreciate that. And because there is a lot of interest around what tools we should use or where we can alleviate some of the human-driven process. Frank, could you impart some advice on what criteria teams should use when they're evaluating those tools so that they can improve the integrity while staying fair, staying inclusive, and staying candidate friendly?
Yeah, and so I mean, just to share a little bit, I think these are a couple of things that are near and dear because they form the direction of how we build our product. And so ultimately, you're looking for tools that fit naturally in an interview. So the best tooling is invisible to an honest candidate. And so I think the goal here shouldn't be to force somebody to download something to install. Personally, I don't have a personal computer anymore. And so in this era of we all have laptops and we're all, I think, operating in different ways. You're asking me to interview somewhere where I have to download something to my work computer? That's a tall order. And so does it fit naturally in the process? Is it not tight, turn them as screws to candidates? 2, does it test some sort of capability, or is it just a compliance thing? This eyeball tracking that we just, kind of made jokes about, you're testing somebody's ability to make eye contact versus somebody's ability to actually, perform a skill or demonstrate a skill. Right. And then ultimately, again, as we were just talking about, is the human in charge. This is a human-led process to make it as empathetic to candidates as possible. And you want to bring all that together as you're thinking about different tooling to use, and hopefully you find the right partner that's willing to partner deeply.
I really appreciate that reframe because I've evaluated a lot of tools that are that require candidate engagement, and I really like that reframe of it should be invisible to an honest candidate. Jen, what criteria do you use when evaluating tools?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I've evaluated about a dozen tools over the last 8 months, and there's no silver bullet. That I have found. If anybody has one, let me know. But when I see criteria and evaluating tools for integrity, my mind does go into the direction of compliance, because when there is good compliance as a foundation, it builds better integrity and fairness, to candidates. So I have developed a list of a few questions that I like to ask to AI tools vendors. Like, for example, where in the funnel does it actually add value, and what does it replace? What exactly are you analyzing, and how do you generate your outputs? What is your security posture, and how do you handle candidate data? And so you can definitely ask these tools vendors for their SOC 2 compliance recent report summary. Can I audit and trace how decisions are flagged and flags are generated? And then how do you identify and handle false positives, bias, or edge cases? So, yeah.
Thank you. Let's see. We're wrapping up on time, so I'll just I'll ask you guys to speak a little bit to legal defensibility and documentation. Jen, how do you communicate a rejection reason due to suspected fraud in a way that's professional, consistent, and reduces our legal risk?
I'm going to be perfectly honest. I just reject them. So once I'm done with it, I communicate in a consistent, neutral way, that's aligned to our process. Thank you again for your time and for sharing your experience with us. After careful consideration, we're going in a different direction. Appreciate your interest. Wish you the best. I mean, I don't know if Hannah has anything to add to that. I'd like to hear from her, but that's me.
Nope, I'm on the same page with you. It's not a hill I want to die on. So that's not the battle I want to fight either. It's to stay compliant, obviously document well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and we could be wrong. End of day, we don't know. So
Yes.
so why call someone out for something we're not 1,000% sure on? So I think it's just being respectful, fair. But again, using that information to document and train your team on.
Yeah. Tell us more about what kinds of things we should be documenting and defining up front. Hannah.
I'm going to lean back into speak with your legal teams and your compliance teams. I think it's different for different states, for different companies in general. But kind of going back to that initial training that I spoke about earlier is documenting actual facts and signals versus translations, and really setting that clear, transparent guideline with your interview team on what to actually cover. If you're going to, you have to sit back and ask yourself, are you making assumptions because we're scared and we're being vigilant, or are these true reasons to why we're not going to move forward? So again, it's identifying what are the true signals, what do those look like, and then standardizing that enforcement. Again, it's probably going to change, but that's as things evolve. But today it's make sure it's factual. Document everything. If perhaps someone did a video or a phone interview instead of a video interview, and the candidate flew by, and now you're 3 or 4 interviews into the process, no one is really looking for the things that first person should have looked at because it wasn't documented. So it comes just back down to that initial, communicate with your team. We're in this together. It's just structured interview feedback in general is really where I say it lands best.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I found that really helpful. We've published some of our policies just on our careers page, and it's helpful to be upfront about some of that's external facing, as well as creating those internal guidelines and policies too. Many people asked about particular tools and recommendations. We certainly don't have the time or the platform to do that right here, but please reach out if one of the panelists that you heard said something and that's a breadcrumb you'd like to follow. Please connect with them. Josh, I'll turn it over to you to wrap us up.
Oh, you caught me off guard, but here I am. Thank you so much. Give me just 1 second. I want to drop a link in the chat if you don't mind. But thank you, Callison and Jen and Hannah and Frank for sharing such valuable insights today. I learned a ton. I'm actually probably going to go back and watch this again, the recording, which, and all of you will have the ability to do that as well. I'll be releasing the recording very, very soon. This was a very dense conversation, but I think it's a very important one. And I'm glad that we were able to do this. Thank you to everyone who joined, and a special thank you to our good friends over at CoderPad for making this discussion possible. And like I said, as a reminder, this has been recorded, so you'll be able to go back through it and grab those notes and do everything that you need to do. And if the Recruiting Innovation Summit is not already on your radar, please check it out. It's happening May 5th through 6th in Atlanta. Virtual attendance is an option. We hope to see you there. I've left a link in the chat. Thanks again for being here. Keep an eye out for upcoming webinars and events, and we will see you very, very soon.